So, after a very pleasant drive up through Orkney, we came to our CL at Evie. It's on an elevated position above the road on a farm, with wonderful views across to the adjacent islands. Just below us on the coast is the Broch of Gurness. This was an Iron Age settlement, and there are quite a number on the island. There is of course an entrance fee, but it's well worth paying it because these ruins are very interesting and unusual. Adjacent to the main block there are a number of smaller buildings which it is surmised were joined together and roofed over. I was free to roam about at leisure, unlike some other places where there were restrictions. It was very atmospheric, and it's easy to imagine what a hard life these people had. Being close to the coast, they would of course have been very exposed to raiding parties. I could only admire the skills of these early settlers, splitting and carving the rocks and laying them in such a precise manner. There were a couple of models to give an impression of how they may have been roofed in. Just down the coast a little way is the harbour of Tingwall, where the foot ferry goes across to adjacent islands. I would have liked to visit some of the islands, but there wasn't time in the few days that we were there. It was quite windy, and there was good surf to be seen. On the west side of the island is the small village of Bursay, and here there's an old palace, the Earl's Palace. The palace was built by Robert Stewart, the illegitimate son of James V. He was the first Earl of Orkney. Work began in the mid-1570s. It was built as much for defence as a palace. Only the upper floors had large windows. The lower floors had just narrow slits from which musketeers could aim their muskets. Just outside Bursay is the Brough of Bursay, a small island with just a church and a lighthouse. There's a short causeway leading across to the island which is accessible at low tide. From here, the Kitchener Memorial can be seen. When we got back to the caravan that evening, we were warned that gales were forecast and that we should put the handbrake on the caravan. I don't normally do this for fear of the brakes rusting in wet weather, but I thought it prudent to do so, and was proved right. That night was very rough and the caravan shook and rattled. The following morning the sea was very rough, and we decided to return to Bursay to have a look at the surf. It was indeed very spectacular, as the following slides will show. Skara Brae is a stone-built Neolithic settlement. It is the most complete Neolithic settlement in Europe. Before visiting the actual site, there is a reconstruction that you can visit to get an idea of what conditions were like at that time. Again, it's on the coast, and so must have been vulnerable to any raiding parties. Here, access is more restricted, and the visitor has to keep to marked footpaths. Nonetheless, there's good visual access, and you get a good idea of what it must have been like. Reconstruction gives an idea of what it would have looked like in those days. Not far off are the standing stones of Stennis. Of the original stones, only 4 are left standing. These are thought to be the oldest Neolithic monument in the British Isles. Just up the road from these is the Ring of Brodgar. This is a much larger site than Stennis, and to some degree more spectacular, although the stones aren't as large. There is free access around the site, but you're not permitted to go within the ring. It's a fair walk, starting at the car park and then walking all the way round the ring. Both the standing stones of Stennis and the Ring of Brodgar are classed as a henge. Back on the east side of the island, and near to where we camped, is a very old dovecot. This was built in 1648 and is still in use today. No visit to Orkney, of course, is complete without a visit to Kirkwall, particularly Kirkwall Cathedral. To the south, on the island of Lamholm, is the Italian chapel. This was built by Italian prisoners, brought here from North Africa to build the Churchill barriers. Everything in the chapel was handmade by the prisoners. All of the interior is hand-painted, and the tiles aren't real tiles, they are also hand-painted onto board. The prisoners didn't get to use the chapel much, because by the time it was finished, so were the barriers, and so they were shipped out again.